Hi, this is Dalton from Standard Capital, and I am here with the founders of Artie to talk about their new Series A. How's it going?
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, we're so happy to be investors in your company. And so just to start this video off, can you just give us an overview? Give us the two-liner. What is Artie? What do you do?
So Artie is a fully managed real-time streaming platform. What it means is we move data across systems in real time. So think moving data from Postgres into Snowflake in real time. And we do this so customers can build AI workflows or products that rely on this real-time data feed. And what we're essentially giving customers is the same type of pipelines that Netflix and DoorDash have spent years building in-house, but as a product. So you can set up in a couple of minutes. There's no building or maintaining of any infrastructure.
That's great. And let me repeat some of that back to you. So streaming is one of those terms where I think for most people, they think of Netflix streaming. That is obviously not at all what you do. And so you were specifically talking about the way data goes from point A to point B. What's the most common type of data? Like, let's just give a tangible example.
The most obvious one would be something like a Postgres database where you want to get something from a transactional database like a Postgres, stream that over to like an analytical store like a Snowflake so that you can do real-time analysis.
Okay, that's a great example. And so to repeat back to you, let's imagine you're a company and you have a Postgres database or like a bunch of Postgres databases or a bunch of different systems, and they also have a Snowflake instance. And the Snowflake instance is where their data team does queries or whatever to run the business. You make it easy to pull the data into that instance, and you do it in real time via streaming, which is the term. And so again, just to start from first principles, what's the alternative to streaming? Like, what are the other ways that people solve this?
You can do a full data dump. So what we call a PG dump. So imagine every night you take your entire database and you download it and you upload it into Snowflake. Really simple. It's like a copy and paste. Imagine now you have like 10,000 Postgres databases, or your tables are really, really, really big. That's just an unscalable way to do that. And then we've now evolved, like now we have batches. So imagine taking, hey, the last 24 hours of data since the last I ran the batch, query the database, look at the updated at timestamps, and grab me the last 24 hours of data, and then move that into Snowflake. And so both of those generate a lot of lag. And as the use cases of data has changed over time, became more operational, that lag is just unacceptable.
And so you all are doing something that's an established category, which is just data synchronization, but you have an actual new technology based around streaming. And why hasn't anyone done this before? Like, why isn't this just like the way everything works?
I mean, in short, it's really, really hard. So streaming is one of those things that when you talk to people about it, they're like, oh yeah, it's a very heavy lift. It's a multi-year build. The ROI is just not there because we have to spend a bunch of money, spend a lot of engineering time. And then at the end of it, success rate is not 100%.
Yeah.
We actually read a stat somewhere that success rate for streaming projects are less than 5%.
Wow.
So the ROI is just not there for most companies. And so how do you lower the barrier to entry and make streaming just a lot more accessible to people?
Why it's so difficult is because streaming is just less forgiving. For instance, if you play an event out of order, you're not eventually consistent. You get wrong.
Yeah.
Another one is like if you drop something by accident, it's just all of a sudden, instead of just building an actual streaming application, you end up building a bunch of guardrails around this, and that just takes most of the time.
You're basically saying you have to rebuild TCP.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing. So this is a great segue. I'd love to hear the history of the company. Like, how did you end up, of all things to do with your life, how did you end up building a real-time streaming company?
So it started with my background where I spent most of my career working on large-scale systems. It first started around 2015 when I was working for a marketing automation startup where I was building systems to process and store billions of events per day. This company got acquired by Zendesk, and in 2017, I joined Zendesk to work on Maxwell. Maxwell is an open source framework. It's one of the two popular CDC frameworks out there where specifically Maxwell reads data from MySQL bin logs and publishes them to Kafka. And at Zendesk, we were using the Maxwell to be able to stitch together products so that we can provide a unified experience. After Zendesk, I joined OpenDoor to work on growth. It was a completely different role. Like, I wasn't that focused on the data side. However, the same thing kept coming up, which was I would ask my data team to give me fresher data in Snowflake so that, we could iterate faster on experimentation, launched more reverse ETL products and more additional use cases. But I was basically always getting told something similar, which is some theme around like, hey, this is too hard. We don't have the resources. We have to refactor everything and we just can't do it.
The difference is true real time versus what, 3 or 4 hours lag?
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about?
And like the way that Jacqueline's describing it is how I like to call poor man CDC, which is like select star from source where last updated as last run at, which is not real CDC. Real CDC is like reading from the actual database journal and like grabbing those changes. Because I couldn't get this, like I couldn't get my data team to build it, I ended up just exploring what's available in the market. And I looked at all the options out there and basically came to a realization that all the tools out there, they're primarily batched. And batch tools out there are really good for SaaS data sources like Salesforce, HubSpot, Zendesk, but just completely fall apart for transactional databases where the volume is really high and the like requirements for uptime and reliability is critical. And simply, they were not built for infra and platform teams. They were more primarily built for like data teams or like growth or like marketing teams. And as a result, none of the options really worked for us. So we were left with building this pipeline out. And very soon, we had a pipeline at Opendoor that was the typical in-house pipelines now that we replace, which is Debezium, which is the most popular open source framework out there for CDC. We deployed that through Confluent. Then we had Kafka. And then we had merge scripts and a bunch of orchestration logic to be able to synchronize the whole thing. We had a team of 7 engineers try to build this for about a year. And at the end of it, like it still wasn't production ready.
Wow. That's crazy because that's a real estate company.
Yeah.
You had a team of 7 trying to build real-time streaming and it wasn't a huge success. You got to figure there's a lot of that going on. Is that the sense you guys get? Is that people keep trying to build this?
Yes. And that's when like it started to really click for me where I was like, every company that hits a certain data threshold will have to face this problem. And spending a year or 2 years building a Postgres to Snowflake connector is just not it. Like that just seems wrong. So then I started to ask questions around like with my friends as well to be like, what if this could be a product where people could deploy this in minutes and be able to get the same level of sophistication that you would get from if you were to build this in-house?
And so that makes a ton of sense. How did you end up starting a company? And like, what were the next steps after that? Yeah.
Yeah. So as for how we know each other, we're married. And around like 3-4 years ago, when he was building this pipeline at Opendoor, he was telling me about this problem. And he got really excited because he was telling me how once they got real-time data into Snowflake, what that meant for the company, the products that they could build. And there was so many like downstream benefits. And he got really excited. He said, what if this could be a product? And I was actually very skeptical at the time. I was like, this sounds very useful. It sounds table stakes. I think there must be like companies out there that are already doing this. We just don't know it yet. And so I went out and we just did some research. I ended up talking to like engineers at different companies. And one thing that became really clear is the amount of time and engineering resources that was being poured into like solving this problem at many different companies. And then the second thing that was important that got me a lot of conviction is realizing that it's not an Opendoor specific problem or a Zendesk specific problem, but it was, like Robin said, it's like at a company's life cycle, at a certain scale, they will hit this problem. And a lot of them end up going down this exact same journey of spending a couple years building it out themselves. And so for me, it felt like, okay, there's like a structural thing here where how streaming works just doesn't quite work. And we had an opportunity to come in and like replace that piece of the stack.
You did YC and what was the story there?
We were like, this sounds really exciting. Let's just quit our jobs.
Yeah.
And then, we had the classic, if we build the product, people will just buy it.
Oh yeah, it's that easy, right?
Yeah. Obviously, that's not how we learned that's not how things work. But that was the premise when we quit our jobs.
Yeah.
And we had about 4 months where we were just building and I was trying to sell it until we got accepted to YC. And then went through YC, that's when we really learned the basics of how to be a founder, how to build a product, how to talk to your users. And we spent the bulk of YC, because we had spent about 4 to 6 months building, we spent the bulk of YC like selling really hard. That really like kicked us off. We got our first, let's say like 7 or 8 customers during the first 9 months of existence, and now we're here.
That's great. And again, great segue to the next part, where I'd love to hear a couple of case studies of some of your customers that have had a lot of success adopting your platform. What are they doing? What are the use cases?
Yeah, I think the best use cases are when the use case demands data freshness and correctness. Like those two things really matter a lot. And I think there are 2 classes of use cases. One are what we call just more known real-time use cases that exist today. So a couple examples are, we have a company that's using Artie to power their risk systems, such that they can identify potentially risky or fraudulent identities faster to help their users reduce losses from fraud.
That makes sense that needs to be real time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like 3 hours lag with the fraud seems not good enough.
Yeah. So now they have like sub-minute latency to actually run through the entire end-to-end workflow. We have companies that are powering recommendation engines. So looking at what a user has done in terms of their trades in the last couple of minutes, and then using that to recommend the next best coin or trade that they can make. And the last is actually really popular. It's just embedding customer-facing analytics into your product. And so once you open up customer data back and let them see their own data, that
if it's not real time, it's distressing.
Yes.
Right.
Then you're running support tickets.
I mean, yeah, users will end up entering support tickets. They think the product is down.
Yeah. Imagine if you're Stripe.
Yeah.
And it's doesn't show your customers. You're someone just bought a bunch of stuff and it doesn't show up. Yeah. That's distressing.
Yeah. And then the second class of use cases are all these emerging AI use cases, where I'll give you an example. One of our customers, they're building an AI agent that is embedded into their product. And the whole role is more like a support assistance type of use case where they know what is the best way to use their product. And when a new user joins, understanding the latest actions, maybe configurations that they've changed in the last couple of minutes, and then recommending the next best action such that they can use the product better. And so that's a classic one, right? If the agent doesn't have context into what the user did in the last minute, they can't give the best suggestion for the next step.
That makes a lot of sense. And from our perspective at Standard Capital, obviously we're big believers in AI, and everything is changing and SaaS is changing. That's a whole other topic. But it seems like if you are investing tons of money into an AI build out, say you're a Fortune 500 or smaller, maybe you're running an open source model, maybe you're running some crazy enterprise version of one of the foundation models, you still have to feed your data into that thing, right? And it seems like if you're going to spend, tons and tons and tons of money on the AI infrastructure, to not have it be real time is very dumb. Still with me? And so it makes a lot of sense why you will see huge tailwinds from this AI adoption in the enterprise to make people want to buy Artie. So that's our belief. Yeah, I think this is the kind of business that will still exist, even if the AIs are really smart.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we're seeing, right? Over the last 12 months, just over 50% of our pipeline are companies, and this ranges from startups all the way to larger enterprises that are typically slower moving, but they're coming in because they're hey, we want to build AI into XYZ workflow or product that we want to expose to customers, and we need to rethink how our data infrastructure works.
That's great. And so what is your pitch to customers? Say you're doing your first call with someone that's qualified. I'm sure there's people watching the video that could be potential customers. Yeah, how do you talk to them about what their problems are? How do you know if you're a good fit? Yeah, just walk us through that.
Our best users are usually engineering teams that are processing high volumes of transactional data, and they need it into some downstream system in near real time, defined as, let's say, sub-minute or even sub-5 minutes if you have very large scales of data. And the question that I like to pose to them to know if they're a good candidate for Artie is usually, is streaming appropriate or is it overkill? And to generalize this, it's appropriate when you need sub-minute or sub-5 minute use cases. Or 2, you have so much data to process that a batch system would just completely break down and cannot keep up. To talk about like the two classes of users that we typically see, one is, companies that have come from a fully in-house build or partially managed CDC platforms. So think the Debezium and Kafkas, think AWS DMS, land in an S3, and then you have to snowpipe it into Snowflake. Those are just some examples. But what happens is you set this pipeline up, and as your volume grows and as your use cases evolve, usually you'll run into, oh, wow, it's getting really brittle. As we add more capabilities on, it's become a Frankenstein of a build. We're spending more and more engineering resources on maintaining the edge cases of this pipeline than focusing on what a streaming pipeline can actually enable that's more valuable for the business. And then we hear a lot of situations where, oh yeah, we have like 1 to 2 very core engineers.
And this is all they
that like this, only they know how to run this system end to end.
Okay, so it works. It's just if you lost these people, then
it would be like disastrous. And then there's the other class is just really high growth companies where you might have started up with a batch system, and then you're growing so quickly that the batches start failing. You're doing more full resyncs, and then the lag from processing so much data just surpasses the SLAs of what your system can take. And so for those guys, it's really funny because they know that they've outgrown the system. They know they need to upgrade, and then they're looking at like best in class streaming builds like the ones that Netflix has done, and they're like, wow, do we really have to now go hire 10 engineers with distributed systems experience, spend 1 to 2 years, and it's not 100% success rate. And I think Artie was built for those exact use cases.
That makes sense. And probably there will be more companies like that in the future than less, just given the scale of data that is being generated by, everything around us. So it's hard to imagine there won't be more of this problem in the future. So obviously we've talked a lot about hiring and best practices for hiring. I know that's something you're really focused on. So I'd love to hear just your thinking about what kind of candidates you're looking for, what kind of culture you have. Yeah, just walk us through it.
Yeah. So number one, we're fully in person. We are a very small but very nimble team. We're building some of the most important infrastructure that like companies are building everything else on top of. What really sets us apart, I would say, is a couple of things. Number one, we're at the intersection of like something that's deeply technical and then also a fast-growing startup. What that translates into is we move fast, but given the fact that we're sitting in company's critical path, nothing can break, right? And like that presents a unique set of challenges where the problems are hard, expectations are high, but the work really matters. And this doesn't just apply to engineering. This applies to go-to-market as well, where, they could go from helping a prospect through a sales process, helping us refine our product narrative pitch, to contributing to our product roadmap. The work here really matters. If you want to be working on something that quietly powers some of the most important systems that companies are building next and want to grow faster than you could, that you would anywhere else, that's us.
That sounds like fun. Yeah. And then kind of open-ended question for you. I like to ask people this. What is the future? What is the future, but specifically in your space? Like, do you have any hot takes or just vision for what happens with AI and with data synchronization? Love to hear your thoughts there.
The sentiment that real time is the future has been said many times before. There's nothing new there. I think what's new is like how quickly this is all happening like right now. What I mean by that is like in the last couple of years, we've seen people like experimenting with AI to now really pushing it into live production systems. And let's like even take a step back. Like pre-AI, what we've seen is like as use cases evolved, the requirements for latency has changed. So 25, 30 years ago, people were doing these like monthly syncs into these like BI reports that run on Teradata. And then, data warehouses went into the cloud and they were more scalable, more powerful. People could do more with them. So people started doing like weekly syncs into Redshift. And then down to today, a lot of companies are doing like 15-minute batches into, whatever downstream system they have to power like analytics and like other use cases. And so that trend hasn't changed, but what AI has done is really like accelerate towards real time.
I mean, one example of that is I would say, I think about Google search. When Google was a tiny startup and started, I think their indexes were months old. Like they would run an index. It was a big batch job. I know people that worked there, and sometimes the batches would fail. And so their index would get a little stale. Whereas if you look at every generation of Google search improvement, it's now pretty real time. I think you can publish a new website and it'll show up in a Google search result really fast, especially as they add more AI features. And this is already currently an issue if you're using the chatbots, where their knowledge cutoff is like a real pain in the butt, right? They're going to fix that. And so even what we're used to using as consumers of AI systems, it's all moving towards real time, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And then again, voice AI is obviously a huge trend that we're seeing. That's a real-time system.
Yep.
And so it's, it kind of seems like you're on the right side of history on that.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about like when we get to a point where you remove the human from the loop and you have these AI systems that are making decisions for you, they're automating workflows for you, and then they're directly interacting with your customers without a human in the loop, then if they're running on stale data, it just doesn't work because a chatbot that's responding based off of stale data is just going to give you the wrong answer. So AI is just making real-time like table stakes for whatever people want to build from there on.
Yeah, can you imagine talking to a customer support bot and it's just like wrong? You're trying to like rebook a flight or something?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Like you booked a flight, the transaction failed. This was all 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And the bot isn't updated. Like it's updated every 6 hours.
Yeah. Well, super helpful. And then kind of like last topic I'd like to ask you about, why standard? Obviously you all have a lot of choices like all founders do. And so I'd love to hear just kind of your thinking around standard and how it's been going since you've been in the portfolio.
I think the number one thing why we chose standard was the people. So you, PG, Brian, you've all had a lot of experience with developer focused companies, and it's from like inception, from an idea stage, or even they're pivoting or early traction, all the way through to like building more durable infrastructure companies. And I think that transition is really, really tough, and where a lot of companies actually struggle. And then when we think about building a company, it's a long-term like project.
Yeah.
And there isn't like one defining moment where you've like made the right decision and it like works, right? It's like a series of right decisions that you've made that's correct over time. And then it starts to compound on each other. And so when we think about like, okay, who is the best partner to help us like pressure test and think about all the different trade-offs, making the right decisions on sequencing, on where we're focused on how we build our team, you guys just seem like the best partner to do that. And then I would say the second thing is that community aspect really attracted us. Every quarter doing board meetings where you're really just meeting with all the other portfolio companies. That was really helpful because what it does is you're compressing the learning because you're taking the problems and solutions and they're all adjacent problems to yours of similar companies at similar stages.
Isn't it funny how everyone kind of had the same problems?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But like they're thinking about it from different angles. They had like different thinkings around like how to solve it. And that compresses the learnings. There were even problems that like we don't have today that we now know to anticipate. And that compresses the learning to beyond what we could. It would just be a lot slower if we had to do it ourselves. And then something that's also like really unique that I love is this culture of, it's not a zero-sum game. Everyone's really helpful. You're sharing like what your failures are, what you're doing well on, and really helping each other. I think all of that combined just made Standard a partner where we think could give us an edge to actually win long term. And it was way more than the money or the capital. And I think that's just really rare.
I really appreciate that. We do love developer tools and we have seen a lot. And part of the edge is making this video. So hopefully, we get to, tell your story. You get to keep telling your story. We're going to keep making videos with you. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being here today and congratulations on the Series A.
Thank you.
Thank you.